To everybody, both now and in the future, as you are watching this. My name is Max Myers. I work at the Mississippi Center for Justice. I also, before I jump into talking about us, I want to also introduce Yumika Jones. Yumika, do you want to, again, rather than me introduce myself, I'll say very quickly, Yumika is one of the longest employees at MCJ, as well as when I think about the person I get most excited with to work on a team. And sorry for any of my other team members that are watching this. Yumika fits that box. So I'm really, it's a big pleasure to get to work with Yumika, particularly on Financial Fridays. So with that, I will turn things over to Yumika to introduce herself.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Yumika Jones, and I am, as Max said, been here at Mississippi Center for Justice for about 10 years now. And I have worked under several positions here, one being the office manager for the Indianola office, as well as now in the project manager for the New Roots Credit Partnership that's housed under our Consumer Protection Division. And right about now, that's about it for now. We'll get further into it later. Turn it back over to Max.
For sure. Yeah. And I imagine, as these Financial Fridays become more of a regular occurrence, once a month, that we'll have opportunities to bring in some of our other team members who I listed over there in alphabetical order. We've got folks primarily, so I'll say at a broad level, the Mississippi Center for Justice is a nonprofit law firm that's based in Mississippi, focused on Mississippi issues and Mississippians. We fight for racial and economic justice, and what that looks like on the consumer front, which is our team, or it's a subsect of Mississippi Center for Justice. And on the consumer front, we work with to combat payday lenders and consumer debt, things like foreclosure issues. And then we also have folks that are in the justice courts, as well as some of the smaller local courts as well, doing navigation projects to basically orient people towards what their rights are in justice court, as well as how to combat financial debt that people take on as a result of a entire system that is really financial system that is really created for people that are in economic hardship, people who are having a tough time with their money, to continue having an even tougher time. It's really hard to break that cycle. And so in that sense, that's why we exist as a team. Part of our work is advocacy. So we're actually, we can be advocates for people in courts. We can show up and to mediations or conversations with, to give you an example, this week, I attended a mediation with an attorney for a mobile home company that has been doing pretty dubious lending practices and trying to fight that. So we're actually stepping in to represent a community member personally. We also do a lot of information, and that's really information disbursement, trying to get as much information out into the community as possible, because information really is, especially when you're dealing with finances, it can be the difference between knowing about payday lending alternatives, like our New Roots Credit Partnership, which I'll talk about in a second, and taking out a payday loan and paying insane amounts of interest and really not ever getting out from underneath that. The story that most recently, I think, reflects the importance of financial knowledge when it comes to payday lending alternatives was a story right here out of Mississippi. It was in the Delta in Cleveland, Mississippi. There was a public school teacher there who took out a payday loan, I believe in 1992, for like $200,000. And she just finished paying off that $200 loan this year, almost 30 years later. Maya, I will send you a link to that article so that you can send it out. It was really pretty. I mean, it's shocking, but it's almost shocking that it wasn't shocking enough in the past that everybody already knew about it. The fact that this had gone on for 30 years for this person, that by itself was shocking to me. So today in particular, so actually before I go on, I'll say that Financial Fridays are an opportunity for the Mississippi Center for Justice and the City of Jackson to collaborate, to get information out to folks, as well as hear what kind of questions folks have and respond to that and actually be responsive in that sense. So, we have our first topic for today, which is about emergency funds. But we would love, there are topics laid out for the next several months. If you are watching this, if you're live and watching this and have other issues that you want to talk about, you can type those into the chat box, and we can, take that into consideration. Or you can always get in touch with either Maya, Yumika, or myself in order to let us know what you want to hear. So with that, I'm going to jump into talking about today's issue, which is emergency funds. So an emergency fund, generally speaking, and I'll say that it's, all of the things that I'm going to tell you now these are not laws or rules or programs that are defined. All of the information I'm going to tell you is just helpful tools. And I would say that the first thing I'll encourage is for everybody watching to just Google emergency fund or how to save an emergency fund. And they have really great YouTube videos there. Maya, I will also send you a link to a YouTube video that you can share in addition to the article that talk about this in a little bit more, a little bit more of an interest. They've got graphics, they have cartoons and stuff like that. It's all kinds of stuff. So rather than just listening to my boring voice, drone on for 20 minutes. So with that in mind, I will continue. So an emergency fund is a fund. It's a pot of money that someone sets aside. It's separate from your savings. So right off the bat, I'll say that if you right now are thinking, oh, I've got an emergency fund, it's that extra $5,000 that's in my savings that I'll never touch. You're on the right track. You're almost there, but you need to I recommend taking one step further, which is to actually separate that emergency fund that you have into a separate account that is truly untouchable, that you won't dip into no matter what. You treat that as, that is as if it doesn't exist, basically. And the reason for that is to separate it between savings and emergency is a simple example. If I am, so each month that someone is getting a paycheck, some of that money automatically it's just gonna get separated to go into things like bills, rent, food, grocery. All that. Your basics, utilities, internet, things like that. And then if folks are making enough money at that point, then they'll have some left over that you can then split into savings and then pocket cash that you can actually use throughout the month in order to spend for unplanned things like getting, I'm trying to think of an example. My first thought that came to my mind was getting a lottery ticket. I don't know why that was the first thing that came to my mind, but sometimes I get really excited and I want to buy a lottery ticket at a gas station. That comes out of my pocket cash. That's not coming out of my savings, and that's certainly not something that I'm planning each month on. So it's the unplanned small expenses. That's your pocket cash. The savings account is stuff that you are not planning on touching for that month, but it's always there in case you need it. So if you need to get a new pair of pants or something like that, or get clothing for your family, that would probably come out of your savings account. What the reason, and that example should give you a pretty clear distinction between savings and emergencies. If you are pants, very rarely are going to come into an emergency situation. I can't think of an emergency pants situation. However, I can think of lots of situations where not having a good pair of pants or needing to buy a pair of pants, that could then that would create the kind of need that where you would dip into your savings account in order to buy those pants. When you start looking at the difference between a savings and an emergency fund, the big question that you need to ask yourself is, if I don't buy this particular item, so in this example, pants, if I don't buy these pants, will that cause a potential threat to my life, my liberty, or my health? Those three big things: life, liberty, or health. And those are really at the foundation, or a loved one in your family obviously counts as that. Their life, their liberty, or their health. And so if it doesn't fit into one of those groups, then it's probably not an emergency that you should be dipping into your emergency fund. That would be you looking at your savings account and saying, well, I've got enough money to cover, these pants, for example, or I don't have enough money for this. And so I'm just going to have to put off that expense until next month when I get next week when I get a new paycheck. So being able to distinguish right off the bat between what's an emergency and what is not an emergency is really step one to being able to start saving for emergency fund. You have to first define what you're saving it for in order to understand the purpose and really the significance of why you set that aside. That takes us into the second question, which is the how. So we know the what, what is this fund, but how do we actually create it? Especially when you're in a situation where you might be living paycheck to paycheck at the moment, or you don't even have, you might be thinking, well, that's all great, but I actually don't even have savings left over at the end of my month. Maybe I'm dipping into my credit card and I'm having to use my credit card in order to pay for some last minute expenses, at the end of each month. How am I supposed to get back on top? So I would say, when you think about prioritizing, I would, and this is a personal decision, I personally would put money into my emergency fund before I have a savings fund, or do it at the same time. But I would not neglect my emergency fund until I feel like I'm comfortable. As long as you're not going into debt at the end of each month. So that would be priority number one. Don't go into debt at the end of each month. But as long as you're not doing that, you should prioritize your emergency fund. Tuck that away. It could be $20 a month. It could be $50. Any little bit is going to count. I would say we'll get down to question 5 in a second to talk about what a good starting amount is. But realistically, if you can just, part of it is just learning to budget to have this new expense, because really that's what it is. You are creating a new expense in your monthly budget, which is something that you're not going to get any benefit for, and you're not going to see that money or get to enjoy it probably ever. It's going to be just stuck in your bank account, in your emergency fund, and that's okay. You start saving for it by actually doing it. And that sounds kind of like an empty or a halfway answer or something like that, but that's really is the truth of it. It's sort of like, I think about it as I don't know how many people ever take naps on the weekends or something like that, but I sometimes, I'll take a nap and it'll be 30 minutes. And then when I'm done with that 30 minutes, I'll think, oh, I'll just, I kind of want to take another nap, maybe another 15 minutes. But I have to tell myself that the toughest part is actually putting my feet on the ground and doing it. But once I put my feet on the ground, then I'm up, I'm off the couch, I'm not sleeping anymore. Emergency saving is the same thing. As long as you get, the most difficult thing is getting your feet on the ground, is putting that dollar or those $50 or that $100 into a separate account. And that very first time that you do that first deposit is probably going to be the most difficult month for you, because you're going to have to make do that month without the $50, without the $100. But once you get into that routine, and once it's actually, you're in the swing of it, it becomes much more normalized, and you have that space in your budget.
Right. You want to discipline.
Exactly. I noticed that you had unmuted yourself, Jamika, so I was going to see if you wanted to jump in too.
Right. And exactly like you said, the first thing that I would do is create a budget. And creating a budget is going to help you determine where all your money is really going. And once you determine that, then you can look at ways that you can cut back or cut off a category where you're spending some funds, and use that money that you were spending on what you would deem as something unnecessary to place into your emergency fund or your savings account. So that would be the first thing that I would do, is create a budget so that I would know exactly what I'm spending for a month. I would use it for 1 month, and just, anytime you go to a fast food restaurant, you save every receipt so that you can put that in your budget and know, I'm spending this much money eating out, when I could buy some groceries or something to save money, just cook, instead of spending the money out, spending $100 or $200 out a month, just eating out on the highway. So there are ways that you can look at how you're spending your money to cut back so that you could put that money to something more useful, such as that emergency fund. And again, what constitutes an emergency for some people may not constitute an emergency for others. So for instance, I may have an unexpected bill that just popped up. How would I pay for that bill or get that taken care of? I may have a vehicle and my motor may go out of my car, or I may need a new set of tires or something. So I need to make sure that I'm budgeting my money in a way that if something like that unexpected happens, I will have the money to do it rather than trying to go and get a loan somewhere or not being able to take care of that particular expense. Is it?
Absolutely. And I think bringing up the examples of like if your car, for example, is broken, like I personally, for me, I would define that as an emergency because I depend on my car for my life. I mean, that fits in. Remember I said life, liberty, or health. So that would fit into a life one. I can't live, I can't work, I can't do anything unless I have a car that's actually functioning. So I would definitely dip into my account or my emergency account to fix a car. But again, Yumika hit the nail on the head. I mean, for other people who might not need to use their car every week or something, that might not count as a life, liberty or health thing. And so it really, it's those things are just categories, but your actual life fits in within that. And I think that, the next one, number 3, how to balance saving for an emergency fund while paying off large debts. I can actually speak personally to this. I know debt is oftentimes something that can be a weird thing to share about, but I personally, I can say that I had accrued, and so I lived in another state for about a year and then moved back to Mississippi. And the expenses for I was living paycheck to paycheck in the other state. I didn't have enough money to pay for my move. I had to, get a hotel room across I drove across the country, had to get hotels, pay for gas, had to rent a moving van. I mean, all these expenses totaled up to about $3,000. I put everything on my credit card. And when I got to Mississippi, I was still living paycheck to paycheck for my first 6 months, basically here. And so during that time, I was doing minimum payments on my credit card. I was paying, $30 a month or something like that, which I'm sure we'll talk about credit card payments later on. But I will say, if you are paying the minimum payment on your credit card, you're not going to escape that debt. You're basically just kicking the can down the road. And so in order to actually get out of a debt, you need to pay more than just your minimum payment. So that's general rule to live by. We can talk more about that. That's not what today is about. But I'll say the big, back to my story, the big issue I had was I had completely wiped out savings and emergency fund, and was basically just paying off these minimum payments, not knowing what to do. And so I had to sit down, just like Yumika said, I had to make a budget, and I had to see first of all, what expenses did I not need to. Those lottery tickets, the $2 lottery tickets I like to buy every once in a while, I did not buy those at all. I mean, some things are really easy to cut out. Some things are a little bit more difficult, but in doing that and actually setting aside my budget, I could see what is the maximum amount that I could pay on my debt, while also what is a reasonable amount that I can tuck away for savings and for my emergency fund. And so what I ended up doing was I prioritized my debt, certainly, because that'll add up and kill you. Like I said, like the teacher from Cleveland, for example, who, $200 can turn into, I think she ended up paying something like $30,000. I'll send you this article, but I mean, because it's interest, you're not paying on that $200 anymore. You're paying on the fact that these people lent you money, and you might be paying 20%, 25% interest. Back in the 90s, some of the interest rates were as high in the hundreds for interest rate. And so you got to prioritize the debt, but at the same time, you can't forget that you also need to be saving and also putting away money for the emergency. So that's my answer to that, is that it's sort of an all of the above. And then introducing the concept of emergency funds to your children. I mean, this goes into just sort of a bigger picture of financial conversations with your family. And oh, yes, sorry. Oh, I didn't know if you wanted to. I saw you unmuted yourself. I didn't know if you wanted to share.
Well, as far as introducing the concept of emergency funds to your children, I think of 2 things. And this is something personal that I would think. The first thing I would do is just talk about what my finances are and what my expenses are every month with my children, and let them see my budget, how much money I'm making, how much money I'm spending, how much money I'm saving, how much money I'm contributing to my emergency fund. So they will see that firsthand. And the second thing I would do is just add a scenario for them. And one thing that comes to mind for me is send them grocery shopping, send them in a store with a grocery list and give them a certain amount of money and say, hey, you can substitute some things, but some things you can't substitute. And let them figure out a budget of how they're going to spend that and get every item that I need on the list and make sure it's enough to feed X amount of people. So that will be a way for them to understand, you know, this is how I need to spend this money and what I need to spend this money on, and make sure I don't go over that amount. So those are just a couple of tips that I have. Do you have any more, Max?
So that's way better than my example. I like the real world example that you gave. Mine was for our participants who do not know, I taught 4th and 5th grade elementary school for a little while before I went to law school to become a lawyer. And so a lot of my thinking is, classroom lessons and games and stuff like that. But no, Yumika, your example is perfect. Yeah, real world all the way. Send them to the grocery store. Let them see what happens when the rubber hits the road. I agree with that completely. And then as far as a good starting amount for your emergency fund, I think so I would actually, instead of using an amount, I would recommend a percent. And so what I would say is, if you can put away 5% of whatever you are saving each month, so not of your total check. So let's say you have $100 that you get in your check, and you are putting away. That's a bad example. Let's say you get $1,000, you are saving $500, for example. So you save half of that. Then I would try to save 5% of that to go into your emergency fund. So actually what? So no, actually, I guess that's not the best example. This is once you actually get a fund going, like, and you're on your feet. I would want to pick an amount that you would want to have in your emergency fund as a baseline, and then after that, add about 5% of whatever you're saving. So in the scenario that I just gave, where you make $1,000, this is assuming that you already have your emergency fund already tucked away. Make $1,000. I save half of that. I then take 5% of my $500. So in other words, I'm going to take $25 from that, and I'm going to put $25 in my emergency fund and put the other $475 in my savings fund. Because again, you want to be saving more money than what you're putting in your emergency fund, because otherwise, if you had this huge emergency fund and this little tiny savings fund, then you're going to just be dipping into your emergency fund whenever your savings run out each month. So once you can get to that level where you feel like you have a comfortable amount in your emergency fund, I would just do a 5% of whatever you're saving at that point. As far as the actual number that you would want to save for, that also is going to depend for folks. I can tell you that personally, I initially had thought, $1,000 is about enough for me to have that. But then I had an emergency that cost $1,500. And so now my new total is, I want to have a $2,000 emergency fund. But again, that's increasing each month, by maybe $25 each month, for example, which really adds up. That's $600 a year. Wait, no, that's not. That's $300 a year. And so, so that can really, add up so that, pretty soon it's a $5,000 emergency fund or a $10,000 emergency fund. But it's the idea of getting to where you need to go first and then building smaller increments. So we've got a couple of minutes left. If there's any questions, I'd love to take them. I'll also say really quickly that this has been very helpful I'm looking forward to February. I'm going to get some cool graphics and share some really great PowerPoints and stuff like that. Now that I had this first one under our belts. But do folks have any questions for Yumika or myself about emergency funds?
I do know, before anybody else say anything, some of the responses I had were regarding extra resources. So I'm glad you're going to send me some more resources for employees, and I'll send them to them. And you guys had some great examples of how to really teach emergency funds to your kids, but then also how to prioritize everything. So it's been pretty great. It's awesome.
That's fine.
Thank you for having us. I really appreciate it. It was fun for me too to sit back and listen to some more ideas as well.
Likewise, yeah, I really, really grateful for both the City of Jackson, and as well as Financial Fridays program to have us here. And I'm really looking forward to getting to share this time with Yumika every month. We see each other every week, so it's not as special as it could have possibly been. But now we get to see each other every month on this. So next month we'll come with our new topic, and we will be ready to talk with folks and take questions. In the meantime, let me go ahead and give our number out for folks to get in touch with our office line. It is 601-352-2269. That's our general office line, and I am extension 127. So you can get in touch with me now.
Mhm. And I just want to wrap up by saying again, as far as emergencies, what emergencies are, can be different and defined differently for different individuals. So just make sure one of your top things to do is create a budget. That is the first and foremost thing that people should do, and that I recommend that people do every month, is make a budget so that you'll know where your money is going, how much money you're bringing in, what you're spending out. That is the most important thing that you can do. And from there, that just opens up the window so that you'll know how you need to be saving your money, where you can save your money, how much you can save, and how much you can contribute to each fund that you create. First and foremost, create a budget. Budget.
And I totally agree with that, 100%. And just to give everybody a notice, for next month, our theme, we're continuing the theme of savings, but we're looking at saving during tax time. So we know tax season is coming up, and this is going to be something helpful for anyone who needs some help with that.
Absolutely.
Thank you all.
Well, yeah, I guess this concludes today's Financial Fridays. Let me